The city outside Chloe's window was a glittering tapestry of lights, each one a tiny beacon of a life she felt completely separate from. Inside her small apartment, the silence was a heavy, suffocating blanket. It had been 6 weeks since the funeral, 6 weeks since the world had lost all its color. The loss of her mother, her only family, had carved a hollow space inside her chest that echoed with every heartbeat. The walls, once filled with her mother's laughter and the scent of her perfume, now seemed to press in on her, reminding her only of the emptiness. Tonight the silence was too loud, the pain too sharp. She couldn't stay here, surrounded by ghosts. She had to get out, to be somewhere with noise and people, somewhere she could pretend for just a few hours that she wasn't completely alone in the universe. With a resolve that felt fragile, she walked to her closet. Her fingers brushed past her usual comfortable sweaters and jeans, instead pulling out a simple black dress she'd bought for a college presentation and never worn again. It was a little more sophisticated than anything she usually wore. She put it on, applied a touch of makeup to hide the pallor of her cheeks and the shadows under her eyes, and looked at her reflection. The woman staring back looked older, sadder, but determined. She didn't recognize herself, and for tonight, that was exactly what she wanted. She called a cab and gave the driver an address she'd only ever seen in magazines, the Ethelred Hotel. It was the most luxurious place in the city, a palace of glass and marble where the wealthy and powerful stayed. Its famous sky bar, the Zenith, was exactly the kind of place she would never normally go. It was perfect. There she would be anonymous. No one would know her pain. The cab pulled under the hotel's grand awning, and a doorman in a crisp uniform opened her door. The blast of air conditioning was cool and smelled of expensive flowers. Her heels clicked on the polished floor as she made her way through the lavish lobby, feeling like an imposter in a world of opulence. She took the elevator to the top floor, her stomach fluttering with a nervousness that was a welcome distraction from the ache in her heart. The Zenith was everything she imagined. It was dimly lit, with soft jazz music playing, and the entire city spread out beyond its floor-to-ceiling windows. Well-dressed men and women sat at low tables, talking in hushed tones, the clink of crystal glasses a soft punctuation to their conversations. Chloe felt every eye on her, though no one was actually looking. She found a small, empty table tucked in a corner, a vantage point where she could see the room but hopefully remain unseen. She ordered a drink she'd heard of but never tried, something sweet and strong, and then she just sat, sipping it slowly, letting the alcohol warm the cold emptiness inside her. She wasn't here to meet anyone. She was just here to not be home. Across the room, Marcus finished shaking hands with his business associates. The deal was closed, the papers signed. It was a victory that should have felt more significant, but it just felt like another day, another transaction. At 35, he had built an empire from nothing, but the quiet moments after the applause always felt the most hollow. He dismissed his colleagues with a nod, intending to finish his whiskey alone and review the terms in his head. His gaze swept absently across the bar, a habit born from a lifetime of assessing his surroundings. And then he saw her. She was sitting alone, a young woman in a simple black dress, her posture slumped not in laziness, but in a profound weariness that seemed to radiate from her. She wasn't looking at her phone or pretending to be busy. She was just staring into her glass, her expression one of such deep, unguarded sorrow that it caught him off guard. In a room full of people masking their true selves for business or pleasure, her raw vulnerability was like a splash of cold water. He found himself watching her, intrigued. Who was she? What had happened to put that devastating look on her face? He saw her order a second drink, her movements slow and deliberate. He noticed the way she kept swallowing hard as if fighting back tears. Something in his chest tightened. It was an unfamiliar feeling, a urge to protect, to comfort. It was utterly illogical. He was a man who dealt in logic and numbers. He didn't approach sad strangers in bars. Yet he found himself standing up, leaving his half-finished whiskey behind, and walking toward her corner of the room. He approached her table slowly, giving her every chance to look up and signal that she wanted to be left alone. She didn't. She was lost in her own world. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm and low, not wanting to startle her. "I don't mean to intrude, but are you all right?" Chloe's head snapped up. Her eyes, a deep shade of green, were glistening with unshed tears. For a terrifying second, she thought she would shatter under his gaze. He was handsome, older, with sharp features and eyes that looked like they missed nothing. He was dressed in a suit that probably cost more than her rent. He was everything she was trying to escape from tonight. Real life, successful people, normalcy. But his voice had been kind. Not pick-up line kind, but genuinely concerned. and she was so tired of being alone with her grief. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "Does it matter?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Right now it does to me," he replied simply. He gestured to the empty chair opposite her. "May I?" She nodded, too surprised to say no. He sat down, not crowding her, but creating a small, intimate space between them in the vast room. "I'm Marcus," he said. "Chloe." He didn't ask for her life story. He didn't ask why she was sad. He just started talking, telling her a funny, self-deprecating story about a disastrous business meeting he'd once had in this very hotel. To her own amazement, Chloe felt a small, real smile touch her lips. It felt strange on her face, like using a forgotten muscle. He asked her easy questions. What did she do? She was a junior graphic designer. What did she like to do for fun? She used to love painting but hadn't in months. He listened to her answers with a focus that made her feel like she was the most important person in the world. They talked about art, about favorite books, about the ridiculousness of the modern world. For 2 hours, Chloe forgot about the hollow space in her chest. The heavy weight lifted, just a little, replaced by the warm, buzzing feeling of connection and the potent attraction she felt toward this calm, steady man. She learned he was sharp and funny beneath his serious exterior. He learned she was clever and resilient beneath her grief. The bar began to empty around them. The waiter started dimming lights. The spell was about to break. The thought of going back to her silent, lonely apartment was suddenly unbearable. This night, this connection felt like a life raft. She didn't want to let it go. She looked at Marcus, at his strong hands resting on the table, at the way he was looking at her, not with pity, but with what looked like real interest. Taking a deep breath, she gathered all her courage. The old Chloe would never do this. But the old Chloe was gone. "Marcus," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, "I don't want this night to end. My room is upstairs. Would you like to come up?" She held her breath, expecting him to politely decline, to see her for the desperate, sad girl she was. But he didn't. He looked at her, his gaze intense, seeing her not as a project or a conquest, but as a woman making a conscious choice. He saw her strength, not her fragility. He reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. His touch was warm and solid. "Chloe," he said softly, "are you sure? This is your night. You set the pace. I just want to be with you." His words, so full of respect and care, erased her last shred of doubt. The decision was made. The night was no longer about forgetting her pain. It was about discovering something new. Together they stood up, leaving the empty glasses behind, and walked toward the elevator, the promise of something profound and uncharted hanging in the air between them. The elevator ride was a silent, humming ascent into the unknown. Chloe stood slightly apart from Marcus, her arms wrapped around herself, not from cold, but from a sudden, overwhelming wave of nerves. The brave front she had mustered downstairs was beginning to crack, revealing the vulnerable young woman beneath. The doors whispered open onto a plush, silent hallway. Her hand trembled slightly as she slid the keycard into the lock of her room, the click echoing loudly in the quiet corridor. She stepped inside and he followed, closing the door softly behind them. The room was nice but standard for the hotel, a comfortable space that now felt incredibly small and intimate with him in it. The large bed seemed to dominate the room. Chloe stood awkwardly by the window, looking out at the city lights, feeling suddenly and painfully aware of her own inexperience. This was it. She had brought a virtual stranger, a man of obvious worldliness, to her room. What had she been thinking? Marcus didn't move toward her. He placed his jacket neatly over a chair and stood in the center of the room, giving her space. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she wouldn't meet his eyes. "Chloe," he said, his voice a low, calming rumble. "We don't have to do anything. We can just talk. Or I can leave. The offer still stands. This is your night." His words were a balm to her frayed nerves. He wasn't pressuring her. He was giving her an out, reaffirming her control. She turned to face him, her green eyes wide and searching. "I don't want you to leave," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm just nervous." A gentle smile touched his lips. "That's okay. So am I." It was a white lie but a kind one, meant to put her at ease. He took a single step closer, not to crowd her, but to bridge the distance she seemed to need crossed. "Can I come over there?" She nodded, her breath catching in her throat as he closed the distance between them. He stopped just in front of her, close enough that she could smell the subtle, clean scent of his cologne, see the flecks of silver in his blue eyes. He didn't try to kiss her. Instead, he reached out and very slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His fingertips barely grazed her cheek, but the touch sent a shiver through her entire body. It was the first truly tender touch she had felt in weeks, and it undid her completely. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. She looked down embarrassed, but he gently cupped her chin, lifting her face to his. "Hey," he murmured. "It's just me." And in that moment it wasn't a billionaire and a grieving girl. It was just Marcus and Chloe. She leaned into his touch, and that was all the permission he needed. He lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of hunger or conquest. It was a kiss of exploration, of comfort, of deep, resonating connection. It was soft and slow, a silent conversation that asked a question and received its answer in the way her lips moved tentatively against his. That first kiss melted her remaining fears. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart beneath the fine fabric of his shirt. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, and she felt small and safe and cherished. The hollow ache of grief was still there, but it was now filled with a new, overwhelming sensation of warmth and want. They moved toward the bed, a slow, gradual journey punctuated by kisses and soft touches. He was patient, incredibly so, letting her set the pace. Every time she hesitated, he would pause, his eyes asking a silent question, waiting for her nod to continue. He helped her out of her dress, his hands respectful and steady, and she did the same for him, fumbling slightly with the buttons of his shirt until he covered her hands with his to still them. When they were both undressed, he didn't just press forward. He took the time to learn her, to map the landscape of her body with his hands and his lips. He kissed the hollow of her throat, the slope of her shoulder, the inside of her wrist. He worshipped her with a tenderness that brought fresh, happy tears to her eyes. He made her feel beautiful, not broken. Precious, not pitted. When the moment finally came, he looked into her eyes, his own dark with emotion. "Are you sure?" he asked one last time, his voice thick with a desire he was holding tightly in check. "Yes," she breathed, her voice full of a certainty she felt in her soul. "I'm sure." He was as gentle as a man could possibly be. There was a brief, sharp pain that made her gasp, but he stilled immediately, covering her face with soft kisses, whispering soothing words against her skin until the pain faded, replaced by a building, unfamiliar pressure that began to coil deep within her. He moved with a slow, deliberate rhythm that was utterly mesmerizing. It wasn't frantic or rushed, it was a dance, a joining. Chloe wrapped her legs around him, pulling him closer, losing herself in the sensation, in the feeling of being so completely connected to another person. The world outside, her pain, her loneliness, it all shrunk to the size of this room, to this bed, to this man moving inside her with such reverence. The coil inside her tightened, and then shattered into a million pieces of pure, blinding light. She cried out, a sound of pure release, and felt him follow her over the edge, his own groan muffled against her neck. For a long time afterward, they just lay together, limbs entangled, breathing slowly returning to normal. He held her close, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her back. She felt boneless, weightless, and more at peace than she had in months. The sadness felt distant, like a storm that had passed, leaving a calm, clear sky in its wake. She drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep curled against his side, his arm a heavy, protective weight around her. She woke with the first gray light of dawn filtering through the curtains. For one blissful, disoriented moment, she felt warm and content. Then she felt the solid, warm body beside her, heard the steady rhythm of his breathing. Memory came flooding back. The bar. The conversation. The incredible, life-altering intimacy. And then a cold, sharp panic seized her. The light of day was cruel and revealing. She saw his expensive watch on the nightstand, the tailored suit jacket on the chair. She saw herself in a standard hotel room, a girl who had just lost her virginity to a man she didn't know. What had she done? He had been kind, unbelievably so, but it was just one night. A night of comfort for her. He was Marcus, a billionaire. He had a life, a world she couldn't even imagine. He would wake up, be polite, maybe even offer her breakfast, and then he would leave. The thought of facing that polite, awkward morning after conversation was suddenly unbearable. The memory of the vulnerability she had shown him made her cheeks burn with shame. Moving with the stealth of a thief, she carefully extricated herself from his embrace. He stirred slightly in his sleep but didn't wake. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She gathered her clothes from the floor, her dress, her underwear, and tiptoed into the bathroom. She dressed quickly, her fingers fumbling with the buttons. She couldn't face him. She couldn't hear him say goodbye. It would break the beautiful spell of the night, turn something sacred into something sordid. Better to just leave. To let him wake up alone and let that be the end of it. She could preserve the memory, perfect and untouched. She opened the bathroom door, planning to just grab her shoes and her purse and slip out. She would go home, back to her silent apartment, and try to hold on to the feeling of peace he had given her for as long as she could. She crept across the room, shoes in hand, and reached for her purse on the dresser. She was almost free. Going somewhere? His voice, sleep-roughened but clear, came from the bed. She froze, her back to him, her eyes squeezing shut in a wave of pure mortification. So much for a clean getaway. She turned slowly, unable to meet his eyes, her face flaming. He was sitting up in bed, the sheets pulled around his waist, watching her. He didn't look angry. He looked confused and a little hurt. I thought it would be easier, she stammered, staring at a point on the carpet. To just go. Easier for who? He asked quietly. He pushed the sheets back and stood, pulling on his trousers. He walked over to her, stopping a few feet away, not crowding her but blocking her path to the door. Chloe, look at me. Reluctantly, she lifted her gaze. His expression was serious, but his eyes were soft. Last night wasn't just easier for me, he said, his voice low and intense. It wasn't a distraction. I felt something with you. I haven't felt anything real in a long time. The thought of you just slipping out like this. He shook his head. Don't do that. Don't reduce what happened to a one-night mistake. Her heart, which had been sinking, gave a tentative flutter. He wasn't dismissing her. He was asking for more. He reached out and took her hand, his thumb stroking over her knuckles. I want to see you again. Properly. In the daylight. Let me take you to breakfast. Let me have your number. Let me prove to you that this wasn't just a night to forget. The hope that bloomed in her chest was terrifying and wonderful. She searched his face for any hint of dishonesty and found none. He meant it. He really meant it. Okay, she whispered, a real smile finally breaking through her embarrassment. Okay. I'd like that. He smiled back, a genuine, relieved smile that reached his eyes. Good, he said, and he leaned in and kissed her, a sweet, promising kiss that tasted of morning and new beginnings. The escape was aborted. The story, it seemed, was just beginning. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind, a beautiful, disorienting dream from which Chloe never wanted to wake. True to his word, Marcus did not let their story end with that single night. He called her the very next afternoon, his voice a warm, familiar sound that sent a thrill through her. He took her to dinner that evening, not at a flashy, loud restaurant, but at a quiet, intimate place where they could actually talk. And they did. 4 hours. They talked about everything and nothing. He asked about her mother and he listened, truly listened, as she shared happy memories through her tears. He shared stories of his own, of building his company from a scrappy startup in his garage, of the loneliness that often came with success, of the pressure of always being the one in charge. They began seeing each other regularly. He was surprisingly thoughtful. He remembered she loved a specific type of chocolate from a tiny patisserie across town and would show up with a small box of them. He came to her small apartment not as a critic of its modest size, but with a genuine appreciation for the way she had made it a home, complimenting her artwork on the walls, paintings she herself had done. He made her feel seen, not for her grief or her circumstances, but for her. For Chloe. But as the initial glow began to settle into a steadier, warmer light, the doubts started to creep in. They were tiny whispers at first, growing louder with every lavish gift he tried to give her, with every glimpse she got into his world. He sent a car to pick her up when it was raining. He tried to buy her a new laptop when hers was running slow. He invited her to a charity gala, and she saw the way people looked at them, the powerful, elusive Marcus Blackwood with a young, unknown woman on his arm. She saw the curious, sometimes calculating glances, heard the whispers she couldn't quite make out. She wore a simple dress she'd saved for months to buy, and it felt cheap and childish next to the elegant gowns around her. The differences between them were a canyon she felt she could never cross. He was 35, a man who owned buildings and made decisions that affected thousands. She was 22, a girl who worried about paying her electricity bill and whose biggest daily decision was what to have for lunch. He lived in a penthouse that looked like a magazine spread, all clean lines and breathtaking views. She lived in a walk-up with quirky plumbing and a neighbor who played his music too loud. He belonged to this world of private jets and five-star hotels. She was a tourist in it, always feeling like she was just visiting. The fear became a constant, cold knot in her stomach. What was she doing? This couldn't last. He would realize she didn't fit. He would get bored of her simplicity. He would eventually see her not as the woman he connected with that sad night, but as a naive girl he'd briefly pitied. The thought of him leaving, of this beautiful dream ending, was becoming more painful than the thought of never having had it at all. She started to pull back just a little. She made excuses sometimes when he asked to see her, saying she was tired or had work to do. She stopped sharing so much, building a small, invisible wall to protect her heart from the shattering she was sure was coming. Marcus noticed the change immediately. He felt her distance, saw the shadow of worry in her eyes even when she smiled. He knew the source of it. He had seen the way she looked around at the gala, had seen her refusal of his gifts. He had been waiting for this, for the reality of their situation to dawn on her. One evening they were sitting on her couch, a comfortable silence between them that now felt strained. He was going over documents on his tablet, and she was sketching idly in a notebook, but she wasn't really present. Her mind was a million miles away. He put the tablet down and turned to her. "Chloe," he said, his voice gentle but serious. "Talk to me. What's wrong?" She kept her eyes on her sketchbook, tracing the same line over and over. "Nothing's wrong." "Please," he said, and the raw honesty in that one word broke her. She looked up, her eyes filled with a turmoil she could no longer hide. "It's just this," she said, gesturing vaguely between them, her voice trembling. "You and me. Marcus, you're a billionaire. And I'm just me. I'm young. I'm still figuring out my life. I live in this tiny apartment and my biggest worry is whether I can afford a new tire for my bike. You worry about international markets." A tear escaped and rolled down her cheek. "This age gap, this life gap, it's too big. People look at us and they think things. They think I'm with you for your money. And maybe one day you'll look at me and think that too. Or you'll realize I don't know how to be in your world. That I don't belong there. I'm just waiting for you to realize it's all a mistake." She finally said it. The fear was out in the open, a living, breathing thing in the room between them. She expected him to get defensive, or maybe even to sadly agree. But he didn't. He simply listened, his gaze never leaving her face, letting her pour out all her insecurities until she was spent and silent. He moved closer to her on the couch, taking both of her hands in his. His hands were so much larger, capable of such strength, yet they held hers with infinite gentleness. "Chloe," he began, his voice low and earnest. "Look at me. Really look at me." She forced herself to meet his intense blue gaze. "Do you see a billionaire? Because when I look at you, I don't see a young graphic designer from a small apartment. I see the woman who was brave enough to talk to a stranger when she was in immense pain. I see the woman with a heart so big, it carries love for the mother she lost and still has room to be kind to everyone she meets. I see the unbelievably talented artist who sees beauty in things most people overlook." He squeezed her hands. "The money? The age? It means nothing. It is nothing. It's just noise. Before I met you, my world was quiet, even in a crowded room. I was successful and I was lonely. I had things but I had no one to share them with who wanted me and not my bank account. That night in the bar, I saw your pain because I recognized it. I have my own version of it. You didn't just forget your pain that night, Chloe. You made me forget mine. You made me feel. You owned my heart from the moment you looked up at me with those sad, beautiful eyes." He reached up and wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "You don't belong to me. We belong with each other. You are not a mistake. You are the single most right thing that has ever happened to me. The world will always have opinions. Let them. They don't know us. They don't know that you are my peace. They don't know that your simple world, as you call it, is the only world I want to come home to. This apartment, with your paintings on the wall and your sketchbooks on the table, feels more like home to me than any penthouse ever could." Chloe listened, and as he spoke, she felt the heavy, cold knot of fear in her stomach begin to loosen and dissolve. He wasn't dismissing her fears. He was answering every single one of them with a love so profound and so certain that it left no room for doubt. He saw her. He truly saw her, and he loved what he saw. A sob of relief escaped her, and then she was in his arms, holding him as tightly as she could, burying her face in his neck. He held her just as tightly as if he would never let go. "I love you, Chloe," he whispered into her hair, the words simple and earth-shattering. "Not despite who you are, but because of who you are. All of it." She pulled back just enough to look at him, her eyes shining with tears of joy now. "I love you too, Marcus," she said, and for the first time, she said it without a single whisper of fear behind the words. He kissed her then, a kiss that was a promise, a seal on the future they would build together. It was a kiss that spoke of forever. The pain of the past was finally, completely healed over, replaced by a love that was strong enough to face any difference, any doubt, any challenge the world could throw at them. They had found their way to each other through the darkness, and now they would walk into the sunlight together. And if you believed in a love that can heal the deepest wounds and bridge the widest gaps, then subscribe for more stories of hearts finding their forever home.